Howdy, it's me, Ian, the duelist, and I want to talk about what is a Spadroon. So, when someone says Spadroon, you have a very common idea. You often think of this: a sword with a knuckle guard, perhaps a front quillon, and a shell that protects the hand, and a pommel. But Spadroons are much more than that. If we look at simply what the British Army called a Spadroon, we see massive variety. The patterns of Spadroons really began in 1786, and they stipulated a cut and thrust, a blade of an inch width minimum for 30 inches. That's loose. It doesn't really describe the girth of the blade or the hilt form or the pommel or anything really. It's really damn loose. So you can have something that looks like this, regular old Spadroon. Of course, not with this handle. This is a bit too garish. I simply like the red handle. You can have something that's also a bit more beastly. A wide blade with the hussar style guard. This one didn't turn out too well because I made it a bit of a rush, but who cares? You get the idea. You can have something like this with a very choppy blade, or you could also have this little oddity here. This oddity is a thrusting blade, as you can see, very specialized for the thrust, with a nice distal taper. This one, ignore the damn curve on this. It's a straight blade that's really just meant for thrusting, but with a very odd hilt, with a hussar style hilt, not thrusting blade. These are actually quite common. You can also have this thrusting blade mounted on this hilt, this double shell guard hilt. And the reason why this is important is because all of these swords, this, and this, would all be called Spadroons in 1786. If we go back in time, we see that this would be called a palash. If it was for the cavalry, this would be called a palash. If this was for the infantry, this would be called a broadsword. But this would always be called Spadroon, a light broadsword blade that can both cut and thrust. You can use it as a small sword. You can use it as a broadsword. You can use it as pretty much whatever the situation calls. And it is because of this that this sword is what we most commonly remember as a Spadroon. But if we look at the regulations of the patterns that were eventually made for infantry officers, although they stipulated that it should be a Spadroon, not necessarily. Again, you could have some pretty beefy blades, and this was common, especially amongst the Scots. They usually mounted their big broadsword blades on Spadroon hilts. You could also have what is essentially a small sword. This is 400 grams. It turned out quite light, quite nimble, and yeah, to call this a Spadroon, it certainly can cut. You've seen the video. If you've seen the videos, you can see that this cuts the water bottles just fine. But this is really not something that you would want to cut with in a duel, or much less on the battlefield. This is purely a weapon for delivering point. So here you see why, when someone says that Spadroons are bad, they can't cut, they can't thrust, they can't whatever. This is why I have a problem when people say this, because what the hell do you mean by a Spadroon? If you mean this, not necessarily. This can have a blade that's more specialized for the thrust, or a blade that's more specialized for the cut. but it's still a sort of light broadsword. If you mean that a Spadroon is not necessarily a good thrusting sword, then just look at this. This can cut, can actually deliver a pretty mean cut, but you don't want to get thrust by this. I mean, if you cut someone in the arm with this, as long as you actually really whip the point, yeah, you can get through clothing, especially if you know, with the point, use proper cutting technique and good edge alignment, of course. Yeah, so is this a small sword? Is it a Spadroon? What the hell is it? Is it a narrow Spadroon? Sword terminology can be a bit of a mess. So when you say something like Spadroon sucks, what the fuck do you mean with Spadroon? Sorry for the word. What do you mean by Spadroon? We're looking at this. This weighs as much as an infantry officer's saber. This is around 700 grams or 600 grams, something along those lines. But because it has a point of balance sort of far away from the hand, it delivers a good cut. But it's also not too heavy. This one's flexible because it's a practice version. But yeah, this is quite nimble. I can do my disengages. I can do my small sword with this just fine. You know, all this fancy stuff. Is it slower than a small sword? Yes. Is it slower than this? Yes. This is very nimble. This is also sharp, so it's quite stiff. So it feels really nice. And yeah, this is a small sword that can cut, deliver a pretty mean cut, but this is a small sword. But this, that would also have been called a Spadroon in period, this is a great beast of a cutter. I mean, you can use the Roth cuts, especially the way Roth describes it by simply just, you know, doing this and then lunging. With something this heavy, you don't care. You don't care if it's moving enough. I mean, this is a beastly blade. If I remember correctly, this is around 700 grams. So it is within the Spadroon range. This is 700 grams. This is what Spadroons would have weighed. The point of balance, that's something else. But, I mean, this would also have been called a Spadroon. This would have been an infantry officer's sword of the late 18th century. So when we say that a certain type of sword is not good, especially something as broad as a Spadroon that was used from the late 17th all the way up to the, hell, even in the middle 19th century, that's a long time. That's almost 200 years of service. And what was called a Spadroon had a lot of variety. Is this a Spadroon? Because if an officer would turn out with this for their 1786 pattern Spadroon, they would have said, that's Spadroon. But at the same time, how can this be a Spadroon when it has such a narrow thrusted blade? But it will also this will also have been called Spadroon. And this everyone calls a Spadroon. So please, and anyone who says stuff about the Spadroon, you need to understand that Spadroon is a very, very, very broad term that could refer to a bunch of different swords. I've made a video on why the disdain of Spadroons is not really justified, especially if we look at the period accounts of people who thought things about the Spadroons, fencing masters, Sir William Hope, Charles Roworth, MacBain, all regarded the Spadroon with a lot of respect. So, Sir William Hope, early 18th century. Donald MacBain, mid 18th century. Charles Roworth, late 18th century, early 19th century. Any fencing master regarded the Spadroon with respect, probably because it was a weapon worthy of being respected. Cut and thrust blade, and you could make it anything, especially under the army regulations. This would have been a Spadroon, this would have been a Spadroon, this would have been a Spadroon. You could make anything a Spadroon. So, yeah, this is a bit of an adventure in sword terminology. I personally quite like the conversations around it. But what I do hate is people not doing the research on the nature of these things. These items were quite complicated. So please, when you refer to a Spadroon, specify what kind of Spadroon you're talking about. Are you talking about this? Are you talking about this? Are you talking about this? So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Fins on. This is such a lovely